At the very beginning of the pandemic, I once went out on a limb and said, people, I am the great vitamin D guru, and if you have enough vitamin D, then you will survive this flu. Of course, I didn't know that it was a design of the virus and what else was involved.
And I can always only recommend the book by Robert Kennedy. There is a treatise on the origin of HIV and AIDS. Pfizer ultimately did nothing different than creating a disease that they later treated.
It has had significant consequences. It has destroyed friendships, destroyed families, divided nations. It's about the pandemic, COVID-19 infections, COVID-19 vaccinations, and what arises around this topic. So, a very relevant topic, and I warmly welcome my colleagues Helmut Sterz and Stefan Hockertz, both toxicologists with years of experience. Welcome.
Thank you very much, and especially for the invitation.
Yes, thank you. You have here, Jörg, a concentration of toxicological expertise that is hardly found in this world anymore, because toxicologists are dying out, and we are like a remnant of the species that still remains.
Therefore, once again, thank you very much for achieving this together. At the very beginning of the pandemic, I once went out on a limb and said to our people, I am the great vitamin D guru, and if you have enough vitamin D, then you will also survive the flu. Of course, I didn't know that it was a design of the virus and everything else around it. And unlike Stefan, I chickened out and kept my mouth shut, and thus survived in this country, though not entirely happily. And now people are slowly starting to process things, although politics still seems not ready for it. And it is all the more important to get information from you where you can truly be experts and say, these are facts and these are some stories that someone tells for some reasons, which we can also discuss further. Maybe we start with Helmut, with you, that you briefly say what you have done in your life and what gave you gray hair.
The gray hair, that's age. So I studied veterinary medicine, virology. I got my doctorate in virology, and then I spent 35 years in toxicology in the pharmaceutical industry, and they were always companies involved with human medications. So as a veterinarian, I then tried to make the new medications as safe as possible from the standpoint of preclinical research, that is toxicology.
Yes, the keyword is security. Yes, we'll come back to that later. Stefan, briefly about you.
Yes, by origin. So originally a biologist, I studied biology, then, did my doctoral thesis on the topic of immunology. So I was still far from toxicology and earned my doctorate in 1986, not 1999, and then made the leap into toxicology in 1999 by combining both fields, much to the dismay of classical toxicologists. They had just recovered from genetic toxicology, and then I established immunotoxicology. That was ultimately my claim to fame, with a few other colleagues from France and the USA. I ultimately co-founded this science, which then also became an ICH guideline. Immunotoxicology, a topic that follows me to this day, which is of course also related to vaccinations. We're right at the topic. And immunotoxicology is something quite special because it describes two paths of toxicology. On one side, toxicology describes, as Helmut has done for many years in the industry, the damage we cause through a substance, that we either ingest or are injected with. Cell damage to various organs. And it's a very, very broad science, which is why it is also dying out. Now, you have to be familiar with all organ systems. You have to know chemistry. That's already tedious. Immunotoxicology has something special there. It can also describe the dual function, the damage triggered by an organ system. Like when we think of autoimmunity, for example, which I can achieve through an overactivation of the immune system, then I get overreactions. That is also toxicology, but a very different kind from what we originally know. Originally, it is only the damage caused by the substance or what then happens to the organ systems. And here, an organ system is capable of causing massive damage itself. I think we are already right in the middle of the topic, because that is exactly, Helmut, you have also written an interesting book about it, by the way. What concerns us a lot with this corona shot is the damage that is also caused by the immune system.
Well, the immune system has gained an extreme amount of knowledge in recent years. It used to be a small squad that took out a few viruses. Now we know that it is a complex control organ in our organism. And if influences come in that cause it to get out of control, then we obviously have a huge problem.
I want to interject, Jörg. I would like to interrupt you briefly. We know almost nothing about the immune system to this day. We are just scratching the surface. So I want to tell our viewers a little bit about what we are discussing here. We are scratching the surface. And if I recall, when I was studying, we were at IL 1, 2, 4, at most 10. Today we are at IL, I don't know, 38. I've lost track. So we are still, so to speak, in the exploration of a system that incredibly builds up and breaks down regulation. And we have understood almost nothing of it, to put it quite clearly.
There are also very important interactions between the immune system and, for example, the brain. And many people don't know that either. And what can happen there, the good Stefan can surely explain to us.
Yes, so briefly again, IL, what Stefan just said, interleukins are messenger substances. And as he says, we are constantly discovering new messenger substances. 36, where are we now? Or even more?
I don't know anymore.
The body needs these messengers to communicate among the various organs and systems. And if these messengers are missing or produced incorrectly, then we have an orchestra with a lot of discordant notes, and then no music comes out that is interesting for the ear or the body. I would like to make a very brief statement at the beginning. From your perspective, what can be said today about this miracle weapon, the COVID-19 vaccination? It was announced so wonderfully. What remains of it? How do we assess this substance or this measure today? Helmut.
Yes, yeah, there are very many opinions on this. My opinion, which is not based on my own experimental knowledge, is the following. I believe it has been proven that this so-called virus is artificial. And we know that researchers like Ralph Baric have been researching coronaviruses for years, also have patents on them, and then apparently teamed up with researchers from Wuhan to, let's say, develop a bioweapon. Although this bioweapon was, of course, not suitable for waging a war, at least not with an enemy, one could potentially tweak them so that they could trigger a flu, which then caused fear and terror among one's own population if pushed accordingly through measures and propaganda. That's how I see it. And that the vaccines, in quotes, of course, only vaccines, are then also based on these modifications to this so-called virus. And this vaccine was delivered right away so that this terrible disease could be treated or prevented. And with that, they actually only caused harm.
That means the vaccine, which was promoted as the salvation, was not a salvation, but an additional harm.
Yes, because the virus probably caused much less harm than the so-called therapy.
Okay, Stefan?
Sorry, I also mentioned that recently on my channel. Helmut, don't take it the wrong way. You always talk about vaccination. You also talk about vaccination in your book, and it is definitely not a vaccination. I know, Ort, what you're using now, and but I've already told Schade this. You wrote the book in that direction with Schade, and the word vaccination keeps coming up. Vaccination is precisely defined by the WHO, or rather, it was defined. They've changed it now. Of course, they changed the definition as it suits them. That's why I like to refer back to definitions from, let's say, 2015. The world wasn't in order then either, or not anymore, but maybe it was a bit better. In 2015 or 2010, the WHO clearly defined vaccination as the administration of a substance of a weakened pathogen or toxin, like tetanus toxin, for example, to which the immune system directly responds, meaning an antigen. The mRNA is not an antigen. I believe I will never tire of proclaiming this to the world. The mRNA is a physiological substance. Even if it has been modified, it is a physiological substance that is not recognized by the immune system in any way. The immune system is not interested in mRNA. Only in our body, through the violation of the cell by the foreign mRNA being brought to the ribosome from outside, a protein is ultimately created, which is supposed to act as an antigen. And that would actually be a vaccination if I had directly given this spike protein. But here I am giving a prodrug. And I think that is a very important point for me, also from a regulatory perspective. You can say much more about that, Helmut, because you are much more familiar with it than I am. A prodrug is a substance that is introduced into the body, which itself shows no effect, pharmacologically speaking, but is first converted in the body and then shows an effect. We know this from many substances that we administer in cancer therapy, for example, where we need a first pass effect in the liver, then I have the active substance. When I do something like this, I have to prove how much of this substance is metabolized. So if I stick with the first pass effect of the liver and what the concentration of the active pharmaceutical ingredient is, and the API is not the mRNA, the API is the spike protein. I would like to end here for now.
Stefan, it is completely clear. In my book here, I made concessions to the readers. I mentioned somewhere at the beginning that it is not a usual vaccination, but I didn't want to keep saying that. And also, didn't want to always put vaccination in quotation marks. That confuses people. And I also stopped or gave up talking about mRNA, even though that would actually be the correct technical term. I once explained what I mean by that when I speak of mRNA here, I say that I call it mRNA. But I didn't want to keep hammering that into people because they were actually interested in something completely different.
Yes, everything is also categorized under vaccination, even if it is technically incorrect, but people have been vaccinated and they have, well, ultimately suffered this rescue operation, which then developed into a trauma under the name of vaccination, so to speak. But once again, it is all the more important to show that it was not a real vaccination, but rather, like many other things, a completely different action that was sold under this label and then, of course, accepted by everyone because we have all been vaccinated since we have been in this world, roughly speaking.
From a regulatory perspective, I have to say that's why it's so important to me, Helmut, that we always, I'm really, yes, I know, yes, so I stick to it firmly. From a regulatory perspective, this is a very special point. We both know that the regulatory requirements for classical vaccinations from a toxicological and pharmacological perspective are actually negligible, right? They say, okay, this is a pathogen that you already have in your body anyway. And now we just take a quick look at the immunology and bam, the thing gets approved. And that's exactly what they relied on, not only because vaccination at that time, in contrast to today, had a very positive character. If the thing in 2021 in public, I did it, but if the key people in public had immediately called it gene therapy, it would have been difficult to vaccinate people. No, they would have been gene therapied. That would have been a bit more difficult. And when we say gene therapy, then we have different regulatory requirements. Then we have, for example, just as an example, because it's a huge topic, I receive at least 3 or 4 emails about it every day. We would have had to measure the shedding issues, for example. Whether they exist or not, I don't care. We would have had to measure it. How much of the substance and how much of the mRNA, but also the produced substance, is transferred from one person to another. We don't have that with vaccinations. The word doesn't even exist. The word shedding exists in the gene therapy guidelines. And that's why it's so important to me that because right at the very beginning, the mistake was made from my perspective, that a different word was used, and therefore the regulatory requirements are completely different.
Sorry, the term gene therapy is also a term that is heavily debated and dismissed. I briefly commented on it because it is briefly mentioned in the WHO guidelines. I think it's really a dispute over nothing. We are introducing genetic information into our cells, which then, contrary to the normal process, produces foreign proteins. For me, it's not a problem to talk about gene therapy, but many people avoid it because they can be attacked as the definitions are different. And therefore, I also avoid mentioning it constantly. But I wrote that there are much stricter guidelines for gene therapy molecules. And also the guidelines of the World Health Organization, which describe general vaccinations, are very clear, and one really should have followed these guidelines. And Pfizer and BioNTech did not do that. They did write, we adhered to the WHO guideline, but then they did nothing that is prescribed there.
Gene therapy, perhaps to add it, Helmut, is certainly a term we can debate in terms of content, but not in terms of regulation. Regulatorily, there is only this term. I didn't create it. One could also say gene modification or introduction of genes or whatever. But the regulatory term in the International Council for Harmonization is gene therapy, and there is nothing else. That's why I have stuck to this term. However, I agree with you that this repeatedly leads to problems in the public because it is not a therapy in that sense. I agree with you on that.
If we disregard this fraud for a moment, it's obviously a fraud that was committed, otherwise it wouldn't have been done. What are the concrete consequences of this gene therapy for the people who today have the most varied symptoms? But what is the mechanism by which this introduction of these substances not received at all?
A crucial mechanism is certainly that this spike protein, which is also on the surface of the virus, but not modified there, that this modified antigen firstly survives very long in the body, and secondly, that it is not intercepted by the immune system, at least not to the necessary extent, and that the circulating spike protein then causes inflammation everywhere it goes in the body and potentially organ failure. And since the messenger RNA, I now say messenger RNA, the mod RNA, is packaged into these nanoparticles, the mod RNA also reaches everywhere in the body. And there this spike protein is then produced everywhere and can exert its harmful effects, particularly causing inflammation. And inflammations can cause very different things in the various organs.
I would like to first modify your question, Jörg, and first say, what does it not do? Yes, yes. I mean, sorry. And I might appear today in the interview as a fan of the WHO. No, I might be a fan of the USA and since the day before yesterday, also Argentina, who have left this organization. But I'll quote the WHO again. A vaccination is supposed to do the following. It should protect against infection so that it does not occur and thus interrupt chains of infection.
Yes, yes.
It has done neither. We know millions of people who have had this shot 2, 3, 4 times and still got sick with corona or some respiratory illnesses. That also means what we see in these bought media, I have to say it quite bluntly, in these bought media, where I would have liked to publish myself in the past, whether it's Nature and whatever they're all called, they are bought media nowadays. What we find there, that this medical procedure carried out millions of times, you notice I still can't bring myself to say the word vaccination, that this procedure would have actually saved many millions of people is false. Period. It is simply a lie that perpetuates itself over and over. That means I want to first commit to saying, what did this stuff not do? It definitely did not move the immune system in the right direction. It definitely did not lead to this infection being in any way less severe or weaker.
So once again, it was and remains a fraud, and in many areas, many statements that were simply lies were lies from the beginning. Also, the information, it stays here, right? It is injected here and it stays there. It never spreads throughout the body. Today, we know, as Helmut said, it has been found in all organs and does not agree with any organs, so we can expect organ dysfunction throughout the body, but we do not know where it is ultimately so severe that this organ then decompensates and makes the person sick.
We basically have 3 fundamental effects. Helmut, you might also want to add something about that, but I only noticed it much later. We have 3 fundamental effects, and this does not make classification easier for the toxicologist because 3 macro systems of our body are being attacked. We do not have a classic hepatotoxicity. We do not have a classic cardiotoxicity. We have those too. But not only that, we have the attack on 3 macro systems. The immune system, you already mentioned something about that, the nervous system. We know the spike proteins are neurotoxic and the psyche. And if you read that the other way around, it is psychoneuroimmunology. Interestingly, a topic I've been dealing with for 30 years, which no one wanted to hear about. So it was always somehow in the pharmaceutical industry. Oh no, come on. No, psychoneuroimmunology, that was so esoteric, you know, like no, somewhere we can't grasp that. And sometimes I think that the creators or the criminals who invented and found this injection might have listened. Even to me, that would be a shame. When I talked about psychoneuroimmunology. For we see the greatest damage precisely in these 3 macrosystems.
Okay.
Yes, well, I have said several times, the mind cannot become ill, but the brain cells become ill. And that is exactly the point. Yes, the brain cells work for the mind, and when the brain cells become ill, they spit out some things, and then the mind can no longer function. We see this in psychological changes due to disturbances in our neurology, and it is obviously quite severe. Helmut.
Yes, I can only agree. I am neither a neurologist nor a psychologist, but I can imagine that many things go wrong in the brain. And the functions that are influenced by the brain are then also negatively affected.
So now we have the mess in High German. What can we do to get out of the mess? I don't know how many millions. There are no concrete numbers, but how many millions are now affected by something they never believed they could get in their lives?
Yes, now it's really time to conduct a thorough review, and not in the way the so-called inquiry commission intends, but rather we must also use these kinds of conversations to wake people up and try to explain to them what is happening and above all what is yet to come. because COVID-19 was just the gateway drug, let's say, to make people dependent. And what is now in the pipeline with new so-called mRNAs that can be roughly anticipated. There are certainly more than 20 or 30 different diseases for which they want to help people not to get these diseases. And that is truly madness, what is being done there. It ranges from Alzheimer's to asthma and cancer and cavities, diabetes. That is a long list that they want to address. And if we get to that point, and if then the World Health Organization prescribes to us in the individual states which vaccinations are to be carried out because they declare a pandemic, then it becomes very, very future-oriented in the sense of Aldous Huxley and Orwell.
Okay, Helmut, then let's stick with this topic for now. How or what perspectives arise from this history we already have for the future? You're on the way with that, Stefan.
Yes, the prospects are not particularly rosy, but I am always an optimist. First of all, it is a development that is already being implemented, and indeed through the back door. This is the use of a self-replicating RNA, that is an RNA capable of replicating itself within the organism. I mentioned earlier that the whole thing is a prodrug, meaning a precursor of a medication. The medication itself, so to speak, for the vaccination in quotes, is indeed a medication that only forms within the body. Now, in toxicology and pharmacology, we have an ironclad law, and it is truly unbreakable. True, actually it was unshakable until 2021, but it should continue to be unshakable. This iron law is something that Theophrastus Bombastus von Hohenheim once said shortly before Paracelsus. The young man already knew that his name was too difficult, so he gave himself a nickname. In 1540 in Einsiedeln, the man plainly said, Einsiedeln, by the way, here in Switzerland, he said this sentence: all things are poison. The dose makes it not a poison. And the word dose is in there. Correct. So, and that is an extremely important point for us. It should actually be an important point for every person. We need to know the dose to be able to make statements at all. How toxic is it? Whether it is toxic at all. Just as Paracelsus said, if I know the dose, then I can assess how toxic the substance is. And then I can also assess how much I can expect a person to handle and how much not.
We do not know the dose. Once again, to all viewers, we do not know the dose.
The dose of the spike protein is unknown. By the way, I have it in writing from Swissmedic. We had a vaccinated person write to them many years ago who then said, yes, I would like to know how many milligrams or micrograms of spike protein per kilogram of body weight is in me now. And then it went back and forth. Yes, that was a bit of beneath. It went back and forth. And in the end, they wrote at Swissmedic, we don't know. They don't know. They don't know the dosage. And now I come back to the slRNA. The dose of the RNA is known. Yes, a few picograms of RNA are packaged into these nanos and injected, but that's just the preliminary stage.
Again, it is not the active pharmaceutical ingredient. It is not the active substance.
And we do not know this active substance. And now a second aspect comes into play. If I already do not know how much mRNA is being read, how much of the spike protein is produced, the regulatory authorities tell us this quite openly. Yes, they do not even lie to us anymore. Then they now build another mechanism before that, so that the RNA replicates itself. So my next question would be, how much RNA is in my body? And I bet what answer I will get. We don't know. So a second black box. And it is, of course, highly dangerous because we know that if our organism, which can happen through dysregulation, produces too much RNA, then it throws it into the waste pile.
It's like at home. Yes, when we have too much of something, it goes in the trash.
And the waste is called an exosome in the cell. For us, it's the trash bin. What do we do with the trash bin? Right, we take it out and put it in the garbage can. The body does the same. The exosome is expelled from the cell and first enters the intercellular space. There it stays and waits for the garbage collection to come and take it away. It's like at home, there's no difference. And the garbage collection comes and takes it away. Through lymph, through interstitial fluids, that's what we call it, it's transported out. Exactly. Away to the dump. Here, skin is a dump. Mucous membranes are a dump. Breathing is a dump. Through this, we remove substances from our body and quite a lot. Now it gets exciting. The question that needs to be clarified, I don't know it. The question that needs to be clarified is how much of this excess mRNA can actually transfer to another person. And compared to that, dear listeners, the shedding of the spike protein is child's play because the spike protein does not replicate on its own and does not produce more spike proteins. Rather, it is like the butter in the fridge. It doesn't increase, it decreases, if anything. And now I would first consider the mRNA is, so to speak, the producing element. Then perhaps as a small side note, I was a bit surprised. They use a Vive virus. That is a Venezuelan equine encephalitis virus, VEF. And I found that out with Michael Niels. This is a bioweapon. VEF is a listed bioweapon in the United States, so we don't need to say more about it. Also in this VEF, for the experts among us, the replicase is upstream. So this RNA replicase, an enzyme that essentially produces more RNA from the RNA present in the organism, in the cytoplasm of the organism. I think, the other way around. I don't think anything. Robert Malone, whom I highly respect, recognized this very early in Japan, and the Japanese, he is attributed with the expression, but it is incorrect. A Japanese scientist told him in Japan that this is the third atomic bomb.
Yes, the comparison might not be entirely wrong.
Yes.
But that means we have to say, in retrospect, lied to and deceived. And looking forward, never again. Never again let ourselves be sold such stuff. How do we get this awakening into the population, what has been done to us and what is obviously still planned for us, and they even make money from it?
Mr. Mudder, do you have an idea? Now, what can we do besides you having written the book? It's already great when you stand up and write a book and say, here, folks, you can read it.
Yes, the book, if I sell a few thousand books, then I reach 0.0% of the population. Broadcasts like yours here reach a lot more people. But probably the side effects and the victims of the side effects also need to become more active and say what happened to them. Because only in this way will the general public understand that it is not just a few isolated cases, but that millions of people are affected here across the globe, and in Germany it is probably a few 100,000. And deaths, they could be in the range of 60,000 people in Germany. That's I just extrapolated that from the number of reported cases, deaths at the Paul Ehrlich Institute. And usually the Americans multiply this number by 30. That corresponds to the uncertainty factor because the reported cases only represent a fraction of what actually happened. So a little over 2,000 reported deaths result in 60,000 fatalities. We all know people who became very ill or died after the outbreak of this disease. Of course, not all of these cases are due to the vaccination, but a large part with great certainty And we need to raise more awareness about this. And I will also give my statement before this inquiry commission this afternoon. I will very likely not wake anyone up there, but I at least want to have said it and laid it out in writing that there is a huge danger if we continue with these so-called vaccinations. And yes, maybe humanity needs to become wise again through harm. And it could, as Stefan says, actually be the Third World War that broke out here 6 years ago. I said from the beginning, this all looks to me like someone wants to wage a war here, and the measures that were taken were very similar. Unbelievable propaganda, coercion of the people, confinement. The few who spoke against it were heavily pressured. According to the principle of management by mushroom, whoever sticks their head out gets cut off. Stefan could certainly say a lot about that. I was only able to go to the supermarket and the pharmacy here in France, nowhere else. So my damage or suffering was relatively minor because I was not vaccinated. But we have to try to spark some kind of grassroots movement. I mean, there are many books that have been written, even if not all, very few have dealt with toxicity and preclinical development. It was much more about the clinic. But there are very many books and very many important, almost heroic people who raised awareness and were all cancelled. If this continues like this, hopefully more people will wake up and see that we were all right. And the only way to calm and silence this vaccine mafia is not to get vaccinated. Then there is no business anymore.
Yes, yes.
Well, I find it very, very exciting. I had to smile inwardly quite a bit. Helmut, you mentioned a number, and I assume you might not even know the interview. I gave an interview with Eva Schmidt in 2020, at the end of 2020. It's still on the channel, by the way. I think it's called It Must Be a Slow-Acting Poison. That's the name of the interview. And there I actually speak in 2020. That was before this stuff really came onto the market, but it was foreseeable that it would. I speak of an estimated magnitude. Back then, I referred to the numbers from that Bill Gates. He had already said something about the topic. I then said literally 60 to 80,000 people will die from it in Germany. These are places like Bamberg or Konstanz außer. So you have an idea of how much that is. It's interesting that you now posthumously, so to speak, arrive at about the same magnitude. Yes, and it keeps increasing. What can we do, Jörg? That's a good question. Actually, it's quite simple. What we're doing right now, not stopping, not letting ourselves be intimidated, not letting anyone silence us in any way. They have always tried that. Every regime has tried to remove smart minds, bright minds from circulation and to silence them. And my great role model, Dietrich Bonhoeffer, never let himself be silenced. Yes, quite the opposite. But he also once said, and this is something I would like to bring into the discussion now. He once said, I can't quote it word for word, dealing with bad and evil people is relatively easy. I can argue, yes, I can build counter arguments. Dealing with stupid people is incredibly difficult. And that is indeed a situation we encounter. We encounter a lot of stupidity, and I have to honestly say I follow Bonhoeffer. In that case, I prefer to leave it alone and only deal with the evil and bad ones in the hope of waking up the stupid ones through that.
No, Stefan, I don't agree with you. We need to do it differently, and I have good hope based on my own medical history. What we need is for the people who have been anesthetized to wake up. Yes, and this anesthesia has been going on for decades. I noticed it as a young student already. It always started before the elections. Red, green, blue, black, no matter who. If you vote for me, I'll take care of you for a lifetime. You can whore, drink, eat, whatever you want, but you'll always get a doctor to help you. And people believe that because nothing else comes out of the propaganda machine every day. And if you hear that every day, then you believe it. So that means we have to go against an overwhelming propaganda.
And that you understand me correctly and also that the viewers understand us correctly. When I speak of stupidity, I mean that 1/3 of these people who are still convinced today that everything they did was right. Sorry, they cannot be helped anymore. But there are still 2/3, over 70% of the population, who partly participated, and I now encounter them quite often, and increasingly, by the way, who regret it. They say, "What on earth did I do?" And now we get into this psychological situation.
Oh, Stefan, you're stuck.
And I try to help these people intensively. They are in the situation where they realized I was seduced, or I was blackmailed, or I allowed myself to be blackmailed, and now they are blaming themselves. My email inbox is full of such people who write to me, and I am incredibly happy to help them. That is also my goal. But there are still people today, yes, doctors, who still promote this vaccination, and I simply have to say, they are either criminals or they are stupid. I cannot help with either.
Yes, as I said, they are normopaths who operate and are guided within the system. But I think from a tactical consideration, how can we reach the people? And I have shown in the last 20 years with the topic of vitamin D, that was also a topic that no one was interested in, and so on and so forth. And I managed, not just me alone, but many others who helped, that today older people have a normal vitamin D level because they supplement. Yes, the level has increased by 70% when people heard they could help themselves. That means what we are doing now, as already mentioned, we must continue. But where is the trigger? Where do we find the people who are not doing well, but are being told, you have this or you have that? In reality, they have spikopathy. Also, how can we, what are the symptoms, or how can it be identified? Hello, you have a problem, and maybe we can help you with it.
That will not be easy. You can indeed detect the spike protein, both the modified and the original from the virus, to distinguish whether it is a virus infection, meaning long COVID, or a vaccine injury. This can now be distinguished in the lab, but it is not easy. When the person has had both a so-called virus infection and the vaccination, then both types could occur. And in court, it would be difficult to say which of the two spike proteins was the trigger. We also need to distinguish the people who are now suffering from either long COVID or suffering due to the vaccination. We cannot help them very much abruptly. These people should definitely eat very healthily and everything that goes with it, vitamins. But to suggest here that there is a pill that eliminates these symptoms, that probably doesn't exist. The syndrome is also far too complex for that, as everyone has different symptoms, and we must try to ensure that people who are not yet vaccinated do not get vaccinated again, and also not against any trivial illnesses. I must say, if a vaccine could be produced against cancer, especially one tailored to individual cancer, then that would certainly be a wonderful solution. But I believe we are still quite a way off from that. There are approaches, and I just heard that the two CEOs of BioNTech are stepping back to develop better cancer medications. That may well be true, and with the money they have earned, they could indeed have long-term success. But the success of the treatment has been moderate so far, and we must prevent many more people from getting vaccinated, and therefore education is, I believe, the essential thing.
Stefan, do you have a bit more in your suitcase?
Yes, I would like to directly address these two gentlemen from the Goldgruber in Mainz. They have learned a lot from Pfizer. I can always recommend Robert Kennedy's book. There is a treatise on the origin of HIV, respectively AIDS. In the end, Pfizer did nothing different than creating a disease that they later treated. These two gentlemen have created a turbo cancer. To me, they are criminals, both of them. I also know why they are disappearing now, because they are afraid of punishment. To then basically come around the corner and say, now we also have the solution for that. They will never manage to get this solution, never. We have been working for 30, 40 years on a vaccine against cancer more intelligently, and we have repeatedly had to give up because we handle patients responsibly and also handle our data responsibly in toxicology. These people cannot do that and will not succeed. They will sell us something that's different.
Yes.
So what else do we have in the quiver? I completely agree with Helmut on this. I mentioned earlier that the range of effects, I am deliberately not talking about side effects because they don't have any effect, right? We've established that. People still get sick. We don't have a vaccine effect. So these are the effects we are seeing now. The range of these effects is so wide that there is truly no pill you could take and say, and this will make you healthy now. No, there is no pill that can simultaneously combat myocarditis, thrombosis, and polyneuropathy. No, I would patent that and then be set for life. It doesn't exist. There will not be one. But if this is work in toxicology. If I cannot combat the poison or the effect of the poison, I must think more about how I can reduce the intake of this poison.
A classic approach in occupational medicine, right? That's how occupational medicine became significant. How can I protect myself? Yes, how can I protect myself? So that I don't absorb the toxin I handle at work. Because what I don't absorb cannot cause any harm. So that is the classic toxicological thinking. Now, people have gotten injected. Well, now I can first make sure that they do not get injected again. First, make sure that it does not continue. We're doing that right now, but now we have 70% of the population producing the poison themselves. So I came up with the idea for myself, because I absolutely agree with Helmut. We can do nothing or very little against the symptoms. Partially maybe, here and there, but we can do little against it. To see how can we reduce the production of the poison? That is actually, so to speak, to reduce the supply, to somehow...
That would even be the causal therapy.
That would be a causal therapy, and I came across a publication, several publications from 2023 and 2024 by Manami Tanaka, a Japanese researcher who studied a fungus called Rubino no Trametes rubinophilia. This is a tramete, so we all know that, right? Like a butterfly, tramete, a kind of tree fungus that grows on locust trees. That's why rubiniophilia. So, right, it is rubiniophil. It loves locust trees. And this fungus actually has very strong, very good properties in cancer treatment. It is 700 years old. You know, I'm not talking about something new here. I am talking about traditional Chinese medicine. And it is 700 years old, and she also used it for cancer, and I believe almost by chance also for gene therapy treated people, and found that the production of the SARS-CoV-2 specific proteins, as she calls it in her publication, significantly decreases. And I found that and thought to myself, wow, that would be a topic. And this wire, that's the common name, spelled Huaier. This wire mushroom is actually capable, not only in the publication but also in our data now, of significantly inhibiting production at the ribosome. There are many studies on this, which also deal with it on a molecular biological level. What actually happens at the ribosome? So there is already a lot of literature on this. In science, we live off the literature, and then we actually managed to obtain this mushroom from China, relatively free of heavy metals, I must say. Yes, you always have to be very careful about that in productions there.
and are now able to provide it to people. We took it a step further because the bioavailability was too low for me. And when I swallow such a capsule, it goes through the gastrointestinal tract and is only absorbed in the small intestine. A lot is lost there. Manami Tanaka gave cancer patients an astonishing 30 grams per day. You have to get that down first. That would be 60 capsules, but you can somehow stir it in and cut it open. And I learned from an earlier scientific work of mine that we absorb significantly more substances through the oral mucosa than usually happens through the gastrointestinal tract. And have now developed melt-in-the-mouth tablets. So this is pure world melt-in-the-mouth tablets that you take in the mouth place under the tongue. Let them spread there. Please do not eat or drink afterward, but just really let them spread. And then this wire is very well absorbed through the oral mucosa. I am really grateful to the colleagues who implemented this. I no longer have a lab. That was Goethe Biotechnology, I must say, because they really implemented it excellently and also have experience with this lipolyophilization so that the substance, which is relatively large molecular, can actually be absorbed through the oral mucosa. Very exciting approach, and I'm not revealing too much by saying that we are currently conducting a tiny study here in Switzerland with the financial means available to us because we don't have the funding of a Pfizer and don't want it either. And also would not conduct a mini small study where we see that people with a high spike protein load take it over weeks, and then we measure the spike protein load. And there are first patients or first clients, as I prefer to call them, where we see that we have a reduction of up to 80%. That means only 20% of the spike protein load remains. Now, please don't ask me if it persists when you stop. I don't know. We have to try all of that. But we managed to reduce the burden of production without any side effects and relatively inexpensively in comparison. And I consider this extremely important, especially from a toxicological perspective. People also feel better as a result. Additionally, the neuropathies decrease. The difficulties, this brain fog, is such a classic point. People tell me, no, that's gone for me. I don't have that anymore. Clearly because the spike proteins are indeed the cause of it as a toxin. If I can remove the cause, then I could win. And as I said, we're working on it. And here in Switzerland, we have therefore also set we have set a focus here now in Switzerland, because in that big canton up north, I'm sorry, I don't like it anymore.
Stefan, that sounds good.
Sorry, Stefan, I find what you're saying fascinating. I would be interested in what you think of other therapies, like what Peter McCullough suggests, namely curcumin and other biological products he proposes as tritherapy against this spike disease. I think that if, for example, this Chinese cancer mushroom works, one could also support it with other substances to gain even greater benefits. So nattokinase was also the second curcumin, and I can't recall the third right now. What do you think about it? Yes.
So you're giving me a great lead. Thank you. It's not prearranged for the viewers, We were able to pack curcumin into melt-in-the-mouth tablets as well, and even conducted pharmacokinetics there. 2 melt-in-the-mouth tablets of curcumin. Replace an infusion, so we get the same area under the curve. Mm-hmm. That's incredible. Mm-hmm. Because infusions with curcumin are being banned more and more since they contain colophony, which is a solubilizer. We have taken this step, and yes, I agree with you. The combination with curcumin certainly makes sense. With nattokinase, to be honest, I am missing the scientific mechanism of action. Nattokinase is a great substance. It's here on my table. I have it here. And I also take it, but for a completely different reason. I tend to get high blood pressure when I get upset. And with nattokinase, you can reduce it a bit with some blood thinning. In that sense, it's a great substance that is capable of dissolving thrombi, for example. No question about it. No question about it. But there I'm dealing with a symptom. I'm not addressing the cause. I'm with you on curcumin. That's also the reason why we made these melt-in-the-mouth tablets for curcumin together with Goethe. The other was, I believe, CDL and the bromelain. Yes, agreed. Is
Bromelain.
Yes.
I'll put it this way. Complementary medicine, that's what we're talking about now. I always tell my clients, my patients, complementary medicine is characterized by the fact that we don't turn a big screw like conventional medicine does with chemotherapy, for example. You take it big screw, everything gone. Exactly, you too. But anyway, we've talked about it often, Jörg. Complementary medicine uses many small screws that are turned slowly. That means a combination of various dietary supplements, bromelain, curcumin, yes, nattokinase, I'm not so sure about yet. Hoya, the Trametes mushroom, is certainly a wonderful approach. Hardly any side effects or almost none. With the Hoya, we initially had a bit of diarrhea in sensitive people, but that subsides. With the curcumin in the lozenges, we have a really nasty side effect, dear people. Yellow teeth. Curcumin is normally a dye, but then you brush your teeth and the issue is resolved. Yes, it is also that, You leave the lozenge in your mouth, and as a result, I naturally have a yellow throat afterward. Yes, so what, people? If that's all it is. These are all manageable side effects. That means the quality of life is maintained. I'm also doing something for my psyche. A very important point, right? I'm no longer harming myself, but finding a way to regain control of the harm I caused myself through lack of information or coercion, without harming myself. I find it wonderful. It is also important to engage with this. So, the combination, yes, and also a longer intake, right? So we are now always in the range of 3 months. Although the small study we are doing now, I hesitate to say study, it is an application. Exactly. It is an application. Study is much too big for that, but we have no other options to apply it. We provide it to people free of charge, and then they have their spike proteins measured. We conduct this study within 4 weeks because we have seen that this is actually sufficient. But I still always speak of 3 months to be sure.
Yes, well, that is really a nice perspective because I have met many colleagues who are at a loss and say, I know nothing. I'm searching, I know nothing. So that would be great, of course. I have also read McCulloch's stuff, who really has great information. I can only recommend getting involved with what comes across there. Also very critical regarding the environment, the whole pharmaceutical environment. He is apparently also affected by some problems. So we have a perspective there. But I would like to take a step back and say, does it really make sense to have your spike proteins determined no matter what symptoms you have? Because then at least there would be a connection, regardless of whether vaccinated or COVID-19 infection. But if I detect spike proteins, then I know I should go in that direction because my symptoms might come from there. Is that correct?
It can be very useful if you can prove that you have this modified spike protein in your blood or tissue when you are fighting in court to be recognized as a vaccine victim, because at the moment most people are being rejected. And if one could prove that it is indeed the harmful spike protein, because the other one is also harmful but not as harmful, then one could also achieve something in court. So from that perspective, it makes sense to me to have the spike protein identified.
Yes. Absolutely. Even if I want to take measures against it, I should have a diagnosis beforehand, right? Shooting blindly makes little sense because we also have other diseases. We have EBV, we have other conditions that also lead to fatigue. So I always advise my clients, yes, please do this spike protein measurement. Das also meistens sendai now. And if possible, there is also a price difference. Please not just the antibodies. That is an indirect detection. That is the reaction of the immune system. I get that for 30 francs, but rather the direct detection of the spike protein, for example, at Emodia. I believe you are also a member of the MWGFD Association. That's the old lab, if you can say that, of Arne Burkhardt, which is now led by Vanessa Schmidt-Kruger. And there, the spike proteins can be directly detected. Important to me, you just mentioned it twice, Helmut, important to me. There is a very simple way to show that the spike protein comes from the vaccination. I argued with Arne about that for a long time. Arne always said, yes, we have to look at cellulation structures. I say, yes, we can search for a long time. I've dealt with such nonsense a lot in my life. It's endless. It's actually much simpler. The solution always lies in simplicity. If I need to do kinetics, very important. I need to take more than one measurement. One measurement is a snapshot and I don't yet know how it moves. I need to do kinetics over, let's say, 1 or 2 months. And I measure not only the spike protein, but also the nucleocapsid. So, for the viewers, what is the nucleocapsid? That is the shell of the virus. It is packaged. That's not, the spike protein isn't just floating around somewhere, but it's packed in a protein shell. That's the so-called nucleocapsid. I can detect that. I can also detect that for different viruses, by the way, because it is quite specific. Vanessa can do that too. And now comes the point. If I only find spike protein in the organism, but no nucleocapsid, then it gets interesting, because then I don't have a viral infection, but still spike proteins. Now one might say, yes, they survived. The virus infection is no longer there, but they are still present. Agreed, that's why the kinetics. Then I wait 2 months and measure again. And then I measure a high spike protein value again and still no nucleocapsid. Yes, folks, that's proof. That's how science works. Then I have the proof that the spike protein comes from this gene injection and not from a virus infection. By the way, it's relatively simple to make that a criterion for exclusion.
Very good. Correct.
Specific question. Is there only this one lab or are there multiple labs that can do this real qualitatively?
How should I say this? I only work within Modia. I don't want to discredit other labs that offer this as well. I don't want that.
Okay, good. Then we will link it below. It's important for many. If someone has another source, they should use it. But this is a source you work with, where you can say what comes out is reliable and you can work with it, okay? This is very important information. Once again, there are many people who have something and can't cope with it, are chronically ill. And then the question is this related to COVID-19 or this a pseudo-vaccination, or do I have something else? Because the therapy would be completely different. And from there, I think it makes sense for the many who suffer from something and don't know where to turn to do the appropriate measurement and then see, yes, I am affected, I have the problem. And then you can adjust accordingly. That would be very important to show people the direction they need to take.
Jörg, we all learned that once, right? So before the therapy comes the diagnosis. Sorry for putting it so simply. And we just have to make this diagnosis. Of course, there are temporal coincidences, you know. In my, I work with clinics here in Switzerland, and I have an incredible number of people who then say, yes, until 2020, 2021, I was doing great. I say, and when did the complaints start? Yes, around mid-21. And then you really sometimes have to get them to say what happened in your life in the meantime. Even just temporal coincidences, but for the individual, this diagnosis is essential.
Yes.
So thank you for that, because I'm also sure that 50, 60, 70, 80, 90% of people do not know that we have such diagnostics today. Everything is deliberately kept unclear so that people do not become informed. And I believe that brings us to the essence of our conversation. We need to inform people that we have been lied to and deceived, that the state was involved, filled its pockets, or threw our money out the window at our expense, and that obviously it was not a one-time action, but that we must expect further actions to follow, which will impair our health even more. Something we absolutely do not want. Therefore, I say a heartfelt thank you to both of you. You both may say a closing word.
if I may add a supplement to a closing word, specifically returning to the problem of enlightenment. In a second book, Professor Bhakti, in particular, explained how these severe changes must occur when we are treated with this so-called mod RNA in the future. In his second book, he showed that it often leads to an insoluble complex or a hybrid between the formed messenger RNA and the DNA, which is produced, for example, with Escherichia coli. In the process, before approval, a very pure DNA was used to produce the messenger RNA. However, when the plasmids from Escherichia coli are used, these hybrids form and they can trigger massive side effects in all areas. And above all, this will also be unavoidable with the new vaccinations with messenger RNA, because the principle of this production, the technology, must be carried out with this modified nucleotide, otherwise it does not work. Because in this process, uridine is replaced by methylpseudoridine, and that is needed to be able to apply this technology. And one cannot get away from that. For future investigations, people need to be told that there is a massive time bomb here, and this can be read in the little book by Bhakti and me.
May I just say something about that, Helmut? It's not just the warning now, but it's also the principle of being rotten, lied to. It doesn't have this effect against cancer, against Alzheimer's, against. That means they are really selling us garbage that harms us and are cashing in millions for it. It is an outrageous fraud being committed against us, Stefan.
Closing words. Everyone who knows me knows that I always try to come out of things positively and give people hope where there is hope. I just mentioned that we can offer a pharmacological solution through dietary supplements, that we have also worked on it pharmaceutically. Perhaps we could also include the supplier, Goethe Biotechnology. Then people will know where can I get something like this? Yes, where can I get these dissolvable tablets? That's truly unique. So they are really the only ones who can do something like this at the moment. So we have taken a pharmacological path. We are staying on this path. I believe that I know that we, the three of us sitting here, are scientifically better than our opponents. They might have more money, but we have the better drive and we have the better ideas and we are smarter. That's how it is. I would like to convey that to people. You also have science and scientists on your side who can do a lot and still have a lot up their sleeve. And as a final note, this is really my last word for the closing statement. I always like to say, on one side, there are pharmacological aids, and on the other side, the one above, the Lord, helps you a bit of faith in God, a bit more Bible knowledge, and you are actually protected from many things quite simply.
Thank you for letting me say that.
Yes, Stefan, thank you very much for that as well. I would like to add one more aspect, a positive one. We still have access to the internet, and we can use this weapon or tool for good, while the other side only abuses it for bad. And once again, we have shown with vitamin D, we made it. We reached the people, we reached a large part of the population, and we can do the same with the things we did today, and we will gladly come together again in half a year or whenever to see what we have achieved. For today, many thanks to both of you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
It was very interesting.
Thank you very much for staying until the end. This means that this video has obviously strengthened your interest in a new health culture and inspired you to take a look at your own health and lifestyle. For this, we have linked the Healthy Living questionnaire for you in the video description. This questionnaire is our jewel in knowledge sharing. Remember that it is never too late to make positive changes. We have also linked a video above for better understanding. If you liked the video, show us your support by giving it a thumbs up, subscribing to our channel, and activating the bell icon so you can receive all our future content. We regularly share valuable insights and tips that can help you lead a healthier and more fulfilling long life. Follow us on Instagram, where we share more inspiring content and health tips for everyday use. Our social media channels are also a great way to stay connected with our community and be inspired by the experiences of others. We have also linked these in the description. Your health is important to us, and we are here to support you every step of the way. Let's embark on the journey to a healthier life and a new health culture together. Until next time.